welcome to our August sessions for Discovering History. It's a pleasure to be here to see so many people in the room. My name is Emma Robertson. I'm Associate Professor in History based at the Bendigo campus of La Trobe University. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting here today if you're in Bendigo with me, the beautiful traditional lands of the Jara people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. To extend a special welcome to any First Nations people that might be here in the room with us today, and also people on Zoom who may be joining us from around Australia on the lands of various traditional owners. I'd like to again extend a warm welcome to any Indigenous people joining us online, and welcome if you're joining us from elsewhere in the world as well today. So this is a collaboration, the seminar series is a collaboration between the Bendigo Goldfields Library, the Bendigo Regional Archive Centre, and we're going to hear from representatives of those, the BRAC team today, and La Trobe University. So without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker is Dr. Susan Walter, who is the Archives Coordinator for the Bendigo Regional Archive Centre here at Bendigo Library. Some of you may know that, you've been upstairs to use the collections. She originally completed a degree in agricultural science at La Trobe University, but she then completed her PhD in Australian history in 2019 on the subject of the history and heritage of Malmsbury Bluestone, which she's going to be talking about tonight. When not working for the library, she researches and writes on the histories of quarries and stone use in Victoria. Her thesis and her obsession with stone, has resulted in the successful nomination of Malmsbury Bluestone as Australia's first global heritage stone resource, which is the subject of tonight's talk. So I'll introduce you to Susan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome from the Archive Centre to tonight's talk. So today's talk covers what a global heritage stone resource and how Malmsbury Bluestone came to be Australia's first Australian stone to be granted this designation. At the same time, it's also a visual and historical tour of lots of little pieces of Malmsbury that have been spread far and wide from the town. So yes, as introduced by Emma, thank you very much. I'm the Archives Coordinator based here in the Bendigo Library, and also a professional historian. In my spare time, I'm the President and Research Coordinator for Malmsbury Historical Society. And yes, I originally trained as an agricultural scientist, and over the decades I've developed a passion, some might call it an obsession, for landscape history. That's why volunteering with the Historical Society, I began that PhD in history in 2013 on the subject of Malmsbury Bluestone. And one of the driving forces of that was being told the stone was famous, but no one could really tell me what it was famous for. So I decided it was time we found out. And what I found far exceeded what I'd actually anticipated. And as my knowledge grew, and I set myself the aim of visiting every site where the stone had been used. But I soon realised I wasn't going to have the time or the budget to do that. So there's still lots of sites I get to visit, but thankfully some of these have been photographed by others, and sometimes some very helpful colleagues and fellow stone enthusiasts have taken photos for me. And it was while researching and writing my thesis, I got sucked down a research rabbit hole when I was introduced to the Heritage Stone Subcommission. And that interaction has resulted in the Global Heritage Stone Resource designation. I'm just going to refer to that as the designation sometimes, just to keep this talk shorter. So all the photos I've included today are mine, except where I've acknowledged their source. So just a brief outline of the talk, I'm going to explain what a designated stone is, some basics about building stones and what distinguishes them from the average rocks that you might stumble across, some key dates in its use, including early uses in the role of the railways, the impact of bluestone soaring technology, key dates in its use, gathering together as New South Wales, South Australia and New Zealand, and then working on to Tasmania and Western Australia. Then we're coming back to Melbourne and regional Victoria. And then I'm going to ask the question, well, where can we go to from here? And I'm really happy to take any questions that you might have at the end of the talk. So, what is a global heritage stone resource. It's a formal international geological designation for important types of natural stone that have been widely used and or have widespread cultural and architectural recognition. It's run through UNESCO through the International Geosciences Program. It's their project number 647, Heritage Stone Designations. And it's run through a Heritage Stone Subcommission, which in turn is run by the International Union of Geological Sciences and the International Association for Engineering, Geology and the Environment. The program commenced in 2012, and the first stone to receive a designation was Portland limestone from Dorset in England in 2016. So there is a formal nomination process. So it's not like the gold logies where you can just put in a popular vote and at the end of the day the most votes win. There's a basic process. So what I got asked to do initially was to present a paper on the proposed stone at a geological conference that had a special heritage stone session in it. So for me that was heading over to Baltimore in 2015. Then they wanted me to get a peer-reviewed paper in a geological publication produced on the proposed stone. And that book has a chapter on Victorian bluestone in it, which was published in 2020, but the chapter itself was digitally published in 2018. Then, when you've had that accepted, you now need to submit a formal nomination, which is what I did in May last year. That nomination is reviewed by 4 Heritage Stone Subcommittee voting members, and 3 or more have to agree to it to get that through to the next stage. So for the Malmsbury Stone, it happened in September last year, and the voting members were representatives from Sweden, London in the United Kingdom, Turkey and Norway. Well, 3 of them voted to say yes in my case. Then it gets sent to the Heritage Stone Subcommittee, all of their voting members, and if more than 60% agree to it, then you get through. And at the end of the day, it again gets formally ratified by the International Union of Geological Sciences, which is what happened in February this year. So there's a long list of selection criteria that you need to document and hopefully meet. You need to know the name of the stone, both in a commercial sense and a geological name of it. What is its area of occurrence? Where is Quarries located in both a geographic and a geological sense? What are its technical properties? What is its mineral composition? What is its colour? What are its constructive properties? Can it withstand compression? Is it non-slip? What is its density, for example? What is the history of its use? And they're looking for stones that have been used for 50 years or more. And they also want to know what its social history is and what the cultural impact of that use has been. What is the distribution of its use? They're really looking for stones that have been exported or have a wide distribution. And keep in mind here that the distance from Carrara in Italy across to London is shorter than it is from Malmsbury to Fremantle. So they may talk about political boundary exporting or wide distances. What is the heritage of its use? Where is it being used and what is the heritage significance of those sites? And the quarries, are they operating? Are they disused? Is the source of that stone protected? And if you manage to jump through all of those hoops, the nominator gets given a diploma. And at times that was harder to achieve than the PhD. I've got a copy of it down here on display too if you want to have a look at it later. So in December last year, there were 32 stones globally that had been given this designation. Examples of the Portland limestone from England, which was the first one, Bath stone from Somerset, Welsh slate you've probably already heard of, and you'll probably find that may also have been used in some early 1860s gravestones in Australia. Connemara marble from Ireland, Carrara marble in Italy, and most of the white marble you'll see even in statues in Bendigo will be Carrara marble. The stone that built the Taj Mahal, or Taj Mahal was built this, from India is one, and in December last year another 10 were accepted, and that's where Malmsbury Bluestone, German roofing slate and Belgian black marble, for example, were all accepted. So to understand the historical importance of Malmsbury Bluestone, it is worth and why it is worthy of being a designated stone, we first need to realise that not every rock type can be used as a building stone. And to make the distinction early on, bluestone in Victoria is a basaltic stone, but bluestone in South Australia is a sedimentary rock. They're not the same. So first let's consider what sorts of properties or characteristics make a good building stone. Stones must be durable. Think of mud bricks left out in the rain. If a rock is easily prone to degradation by water, wind or pressure, it's not going to be suitable for a lot of purposes. Can stonemasons easily work it? Sandstones, limestones and marbles are more easily worked than basalts and granites. And there's often an inverse relationship between durability and workability. Hard stones also require more time and effort, and hence tools need to be sharpened more often. That's adding to the cost of using them. Is the stone attractive? If it stains easily and discolours, then this can affect the finished product depending on where it will be used. And stone is by its very nature expensive to handle and transport. What cost is involved in extracting the stone and transporting it? Is there good access to the quarries by road or rail? And is there good road or rail access to the place where the stone will be used? Will the stone withstand compression? A stone on top of a grade is bearing less pressure than one used as a multi-storey building foundation. Will the stone be used near to fresh or salty water? Salt can degrade sandstones and limestones, but basalts and granites tend to be more resistant. Is it slippery when it's wet? Slates can become slippery, especially if algae grows on them, but basalts tend to be more slip resistant. What size pieces can be extracted from the quarries? If you are looking for columns, lintels, steps, foundation stones, quarries and stones that have fault lines through them can't be used for some of these purposes where bigger pieces are needed. And most of these properties are determined by the geological characteristics of the rocks. And while these can really be changed, over the centuries science and technology has evolved to make the identification of suitable stones more reliable. Basalts tend to be more durable and tend to be slip resistant. They can vary in their degree of workability and their colour. If the basalt is in column formations which are intact, these can offer a more diverse range of uses because you can get long pieces out of it. And Malmsbury Bluestone neatly fitted into most of these requirements, making it a desirable stone. Another factor to consider is that while basalt is widely distributed, it comes in a variety of forms. Basalt is an extrusive igneous rock, meaning it is volcanic in origin and forms when lava breaks through the Earth's surface and cools above ground. And lava can fill deep ancient river valleys, and thus the deposits can be quite deep. Some of the flows north of Kyneton near Greenhill, for example, are over 300 feet deep. Granites, in comparison, are intrusive, meaning that lava forms in masses underground and cools there. And these are then exposed over the millennia as the surrounding landscape is eroded. So most granite outcrops in Victoria, such as Mount Alexander, are much older than our basaltic outcrops. As a general rule, the slower lava cools, the greater the size of the individual mineral crystals which form inside them, which is why granite is more crystalline to the eye than basalt is, because it cools more slowly underground. Some basalt deposits, like that which can be seen in the Organ Pipes National Park, Organ Pipes National Park there, are columnar. And as a large mass of lava has slowly cooled, it has shrunk, divided and formed hexagonal columns. In other places, such as eruption points, such as those at Ball Hill and the Carl's Roof Quarry, which is there, these may be made up of multiple narrow layers of basalt. Or if the stone is cooled more quickly, their physical structure might be different, and that might make them more prone to breaking when worked. And these all won't be suitable as use as building stones. And Victoria is well known for its bluestone, but it was not always desired. Cultural and social factors have determined past trends in the use of bluestone. In 1855, Robert Brown Smythe, who wrote on mining stone and stone uses, suggested that some architectural styles were not favourable to basalt, but it could be handsome if it was well used. In 1864, George Knight, who was an architect, thought basalt was unsuitable for designs where embellishment was desired. And we'll see some examples later where George Knight was clearly wrong in terms of Malmsbury stone. So as I came to realise, it was, and probably still is, a lot of politics behind stone use, but that's a story for another day. But if a stone can't be used for specific designs, it will have limited use. Where Malmsbury was concerned, it had a lighter colour than many other sources of bluestone. It was easier to work and lent itself to carving and moulding. And judging by the newspaper reports which described its use, Malmsbury Bluestone was quite trendy for a few decades. So, what does Malmsbury Bluestone look like? So I'm just going to use the microphone, pass around samples of some of my pet rock collection. They're all bluey, by the way. One of which of those samples is actually a sample of Harcourt granite, just as a comparison. So the first one is actually the same samples are shown on the screen for our online viewers. So one is a coarse sample of Malmsbury Bluestone, which shows what it looks like when it's fresh. And there's also a slab of it on display down here. But note the lighter grey colour and the very small holes in it, which they're called vesicles, and they're formed by bubbles of air in the lava. Malmsbury Bluestone did not come in long, narrow columns like at the Organ Pipes National Park. Rather, the columns were shallower but wider, so the quarries were known for being able to extract large pieces of stone for building. The next is a sample of basalt from Bald Hill near Kyneton, which was used for road making material. The beds of this stone are not columnar and are very fractured, making it unsuitable for most buildings. And the third is a sample of Axdale Bluestone, another stone that was used in building and structures such as curbs and pitches, but it is denser and not as widely used for building as other bluestones, and transport was one of the key influences in the use of Axdale stone. And as you can see, basalt can vary widely in colour, texture and form. So this is a chronology of some of the key events in the history of Malmsbury Bluestone. 1856 is the first recorded date of its use, but there may have been some earlier local farm buildings that predate that. Once the Malmsbury Viaduct was completed in 1861, not only was it a magnificent visual display of what the stone could be used for, but it then enabled it to be moved further up the line to Taradale to work on their viaduct. From there, as the line was completed to Bendigo, it began to spread further up the line to Castlemaine and Bendigo and the Echuca Railway. The introduction of bluestone sawing technology in Victoria in 1867 expanded what it could be used for, and it began to be used in Melbourne and suburbs. From there, the expanding railway network permitted wider usage, and its reputation grew further after the 1873 Intercolonial Exhibition in Sydney. The first bluestone sawing factory was established in Footscray, and in 1874 stone sawing also commenced in Malmsbury itself. So, where did Malmsbury Bluestone actually come from? So this is part of a map that was created for my thesis, and I'm sorry the clarity of it's not that really good, but the light brown area is all the basalt flows between Malmsbury and Kyneton, and these little grey dots on the map are quarry sites that I investigated. For each piece of land that I could find physical or documentary evidence of past quarrying activity, I researched and created a property report. Some of these may have simply been trial holes or examples of domestic or rural use of stone, but several of them were clearly major quarrying activity centres. And these quarries were typically run by teams of quarrymen working in partnership. Many were on private land owned by local farmers. Later, due to a few court cases, quarrying companies formed and they bought the land if they could, thus removing the chance of eviction with no compensation for the efforts they'd made to build a stone industry. Other quarries were on Crown land with permission granted by a licence to extract stone for both public purposes, such as the Malmsbury Reservoir, or for private uses. Quarries on Crown land can be easier to trace because of the government's record-keeping system, but they tend to be more short-term prospects through that annual licence system. Most of the bigger quarries were on private land, and we're talking here, you know the district, that's Bolson's Road and Old Quarry Road, major quarries up there. Around the Malmsbury interchange of the Calder Highway, a number down there, and down what's called Breakneck Road, closer to Lauriston, was another major centre down there. But the processes by which they were leased and managed can be hard to find and document unless a dispute ended in a court case. And thankfully for me, quite a few did. Not so lucky for them. So these three photos here are typical of what you'll find in a former Malmsbury Bluestone quarries used for building purposes. On the top right, we can see the columnar formation. And although they're millions of years old, that's the columns of stone there. And these quarries are quite shallow in comparison to others that you'll find at Tilden, for example, and Footscray in Newport. There are usually signs of manual splitting of stone. This is a piece of discarded stone, but we've got the drilling marks going down the face of the stone there, where they've drilled holes by hand, they've shoved their feathers and wedges in, downward pressure on the wedge puts sideways pressures out, and a fault line develops at the bottom of the hole, and eventually you keep on hammering the stone splits. Explosives were not typically used to extract building stones that would damage the stone, but explosives were used in gravel quarries, and you tend to see large, tall, vertical faces in that particular instance because they don't need to actually stand there and hand drill the stone, you can just blow the rock apart. Some of these holes are backfilled with waste stone, making it really hard to tell how deep they are. Some remain unfilled, while others are almost permanently filled with water. And that's one of the examples there, which is even during the drought, that water hole, well, the quarry is still full of water. So this is the first reported use of the stone, the Malmsbury Church of England School from 1856. It's fairly simple in its design, using the squared coarse rubble method of construction. Unfortunately, despite several efforts to repair it, it was demolished in the 1960s. But it did include some sandstone from Lauriston on the coins on the corners there and around the windows. That stone also features in the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne. Okay, so this was a structure that drew a lot of attention to Malmsbury stone. Cornish and Bruce's original plan was to use stone from Footscray in both the Malmsbury and the Taradale viaducts. But the local fighting over the route of the railway through Kyneton prevented even a temporary line for transportation of materials from Melbourne. The route west of Kyneton onwards was fixed, which meant the Malmsbury viaduct would still be constructed while the arguments went on in Kyneton. And the Malmsbury sources of bluestone filled the supply gap. If you take a stroll through the Malmsbury Gardens and stand at the bases of the arches, you really get a sense of how big it is, the amount of stone that's been used, and the stonemason's skills who made it. The viaduct's completion permitted more Malmsbury stone to be taken up to Taradale for use in their viaduct and other railway structures, given that the quarries were all on the eastern side of the Colvin River. This is the first non-railway structure outside of Malmsbury where I found Malmsbury stone was used. It has survived, but it was moved from its original location in 1913, which is the Castlemaine lockup. Note that this was still government usage of the stone, and note also the solid blocks of stone as opposed to the rubble work, probably to prevent people escaping. The Bank of Victoria in Sandhurst, now Bendigo in 1863, is the first known private use of Malmsbury Bluestone out of Malmsbury. Its use in the base course is rather simple, but it still stands today in its original location. The stone's been painted, however, which makes it hard to see. So man created tools and machinery that could saw softer stones like limestone, marble and sandstone centuries ago. Finding a means of sawing the harder igneous rocks such as bluestone and granite took a lot longer. The Footscray Steam Stone Sawing Company was set up by a group of stonemasons who saw the potential in machinery that could saw bluestone and granite in Victoria. The steam-powered works began operation in 1867, and as soon after they began sourcing bluestone from Malmsbury, Kyneton and Carlsruhe. The experience of using the Malmsbury stone in the viaduct demonstrated that it was easier than other bluestones to work and thus also saw. And the machinery was like a giant bread slicer with large horizontal parallel reciprocating iron blades that worked through the block of stone. But it was the application of sand and water in the grooves that did the physical cutting work, the blades were actually smooth edged. The company changed hands a few times, though the plant remained on the same site. And this photograph was taken after it became the Footscray and Malmsbury Stone Cutting and Quarrying Company in 1887. As work on the Malmsbury Reservoir progressed in 1867, some local businessmen there saw an opportunity to process the stone in Malmsbury itself. Setting themselves up next to the Coloburn River opposite the Botanic Gardens, they used water from the Coloburn Water Race to power a horizontal turbine. And while this was an early use of what we now call green energy, the first major drought prevented them from operating, so the machinery was converted to steam power. And I'd seen this 1880s photograph of Malmsbury many times, and I'd always thought that these two dark items up there were in fact trees. But once I knew the stone sawing works had to be nearby, I realised that are in fact the gable ends of the building in shadow. There's buildings there, the gantry you can just make out, and there's a pile of stones. So it always pays to go back and have another look at your photographs. So what was the impact of stone sawing technology? If you look at some very old headstones, you may find them to be smooth on the front where the words are, but they are rough on the back. The same goes for early bluestone paving or flagstones. An example I've shown of both of those on the slide there. And this is because making a smooth face in stone by hand is time consuming and thus costly. When mechanical sawing began, the parallel blades that went both the front and the back were automatically smooth. And most headstones you'll see in cemeteries today will obviously be sawn as compared to those earlier ones. And just like sandwich or toast slicing in Baker's Delight, by presetting the distance between each sawing blade, you could make relatively thin paving stones or gravestones, or wider items such as steps, windows, lintels, gate posts, bases for wrought iron fences, and the components for more complex graves or memorials. And these could now all be mass produced. These steps at the Stawell Courthouse from the 1870s is one of many examples of this use of Malmsbury Bluestone. This technology also meant that councils could begin to afford bluestone paving and curbing instead of the gravel paths and timber curbs which had typically been used in towns like Kyneton and Bendigo. So with all this in mind, I'm now going to take you on a tour of just some of the sites in which Malmsbury Bluestone was used. Note that this first group is all of them are post-1867 sawing. And I was going to bring some of these buildings in with me tonight, but I couldn't fit them in my backpack, so you'll have to make do with photos instead, I'm sorry. All up, I found over 500 recorded sites across Australia and New Zealand, with suggestions that may also have been used in Southeast Asia and India. So I'll start with New South Wales, South Australia and New Zealand, as these were the earliest places outside of Victoria where it was used. And most of these were being exported by boat, some potentially by rail. I went to Sydney in 2015 to try and find the places reported in the digitised New South Wales newspapers. While these had mainly been paving stones and foundation stones for buildings, they were all gone. I did, however, spot these column bases in the central railway station, but have not found any archival or newspaper record of what the stone is, other than the Sydney sandstone it is supporting. It is clearly basalt, and colour-wise it is a good match for Malmsbury stone, so it remains inconclusive at this stage. The country uses in New South Wales are more likely to have survived, probably because our government or cultural buildings are still in use. The steps of the Deniliquin Courthouse are another example of the impact of stone sawing. Other surviving examples are the bluestone paving at the Orange Courthouse and the windows at Wentworth Jail. The columns in St Peter's and Paul's Old Cathedral in Goulburn were probably custom made on site. First one I'll show you for Adelaide is the base course of the Torrens building in Adelaide, which again are government buildings. This is one of many buildings in Australia where Malmsbury stone was used as a base course. But we can see it's fairly simple in its design, rectangular blocks of stone, smooth face dressing, not too ornate work, but holding up large buildings. And many of these sorts of buildings have survived, but there's equally others that haven't. Another base course was the National Mutual Life Association of Australia offices in Adelaide. But that building was later demolished. They decided to keep the facade, so they moved the facade further down the street. So the Malmsbury Bluestone has been kept, and again it's very similar in design to the Torrens building. I did manage to visit many, but not all of the New Zealand sites that were in the North Island. I do have to confess to hijacking part of a family holiday to go on a Malmsbury Bluestone hunt, but I think it was worth it anyway. There are still a few sites in the South Island I need to investigate. The base course of the Auckland Town Hall is another example of this use as a base course. But unlike the smooth faces of the Adelaide one, this one is mostly what is called quarry face stone. But the doorway is something special and highlights the stone's suitability for decorative carved work, Mr. George Knight. This one's a bit more mundane, or in modern times maybe rather controversial, but the steps holding up Queen Victoria are Malmsbury Bluestone. The red granite pedestal is from Peterhead in Scotland, which just gives you a hint of the global movement of stone in the Australia region. The pedestals of this entrance to the King Edward VII Parade of the Coronation Seawall in Devonport are on New Zealand's Heritage Register. And while King Edward's coronation is in August 1902, the pedestals also commemorate peace in South Africa. Up at Rangihoa, or the Bay of Islands, the Marsden Cross commemorates the first Christian settlement in New Zealand. It takes a little bit of walking to get to, but the views are worth it. When I saw the newspaper reports of this one, I googled it and was sure I had seen it somewhere before. And then I remembered I went straight to my stamp collection and found that. So I wasn't expecting to find Malmsbury Bluestone on a stamp. The Celtic cross on the top of it later broke and was replaced in 1939 with their local Coromandel granite, hence the colour difference. But the original cross would have been another example of decorative carved work in Malmsbury stone. At Otaki, this is a memorial to the noted Maori chief Te Roparaha. It is a fairly simple use of Malmsbury Bluestone, but because of the paint, it is very hard to tell how much of the base is bluestone. But it was made in Melbourne and shipped across to New Zealand. The naturally white stone at the top is Carrara marble from Italy, which is also a designated stone. And it's interesting, I think the bust looks more like one of Beethoven than the imagery you might expect from Maori chief. Perhaps that's more a cultural reflection of the designer and the sculptor. Another use of heritage significance is a base course of the Wellington Town Hall. I was able to find some places where the paint is flaking off to confirm it is basalt underneath. Again, it is quarry faced and it has chisel drafted edges, which we can see the smooth edges on the corners there and very fine parallel lines that have been drafted into that stone with chisels. So let's have a look now at Tasmania and Western Australia, with both of which commenced in the 1880s and coincided with Melbourne's boom time. At the end of this period, a block of Malmsbury Bluestone was exhibited at the Franco-British exhibition in London, for which it won a gold medal, and that was in 1909. So just across Bass Strait in Launceston, we have several examples of base courses of buildings and local monuments. This former bank, commercial bank, has again a simple smooth-faced finished base course, similar to the ones in Adelaide, but the blocks of stone are a bit smaller, perhaps reflecting that the best of the big blocks of stone for Malmsbury had already gone by 1908. This one is simpler still, but it is supporting the more noticeable Aberdeen granite columns. The chisel drafted edges are more noticeable on that one. Sorry. Another government building is the Customs House, this time with a base course decorated with vermiculated work, with again more distinct chisel drafted edges. This style of work, all hand done, is rather costly, so it's not often seen in large quantities. And if you happen to be on the Melbourne to Bendigo train, as you cross Jackson's Creek Viaduct, the parapets above the railway line have got some very small examples of vermiculated work in there, if you're sitting in the right seat at the right time as the train goes over. The entrance steps are also in Malmsbury Bluestone, but noting that the curved face and lip of these steps in contrast to the simple squared ones. These ones were probably handmade on site. At Nile, near Launceston, this memorial reflects a brief resurgence in Malmsbury Bluestone use post-World War I to create war memorials, and that also includes the one at Malmsbury itself. Now, heading off to Western Australia, the use of Malmsbury Bluestone there was driven by the Western Australian gold rush in the 1890s, and there was a bit of political hoo-ha about using a Victorian stone in Western Australia. It was apparently patriotic to import stones from a foreign place like Victoria. Malmsbury Bluestone was used in Perth as well as Fremantle and some more remote locations, but most of this was that's what's in Perth as long as it's since been demolished. Thankfully, Fremantle is more focused on heritage. But this bank has a simple quarry face base course supporting a brick building. These offices are a bit more ornate in quarry face bases with chisel drafted edges, but we've got some decorative bluestone columns in the facade of the building. So back home again to Victoria, and this time with a focus on Melbourne. And here I've tried to show a variety of uses and designs. Finding some of the original bluestone paving in the CBD is a bit of a challenge, but this section is in Spring Street and probably dates to the 1870s. More recent paving, for example, use a lot smaller pieces of stone, so you can actually see quite a significant difference when you go looking for it. In this example, you can see a series of fine parallel lines made as that saw has worked its way through the stone. Most stone sawing these days is done with circular diamond saw blades or diamond wire cutting machines, and it doesn't leave those marks in the stone. In comparison, St Paul's Cathedral features alternate bands of Barrabool Hill sandstone and Malmsbury Bluestone in the internal walls and columns. The columns of St Patrick's Cathedral are also Malmsbury Bluestone, but I think these ones are a bit more decorative. There are also Malmsbury stone columns in St Ignatius' Church in Richmond. When simple circular columns are made in stone, they are often made with a stone lathe in the same way a wood lathe can make poles. But more ornate columns are usually often made in sections and usually hand-made on site. Oops. And this is one of my favourites. The original colonial bank building included a staircase and an ornate carved doorway made of Malmsbury Bluestone. When it was being demolished by William the Wrecker in the 1930s, most of the doorway was rescued and added to a building at the University of Melbourne. It was relocated once more, this time to the entrance of their underground car park where it remains today. At one stage it too was painted white, but the paint was apparently moved in 2013. But it's a superb example of how Malmsbury Bluestone was suited to decorative work at the hands of skilled workmen. I did several walks around Melbourne looking for Malmsbury Bluestone and passed this building many times as I left Southern Cross Station. It wasn't until I found an old drawing of this building that I finally realised that what I had assumed to have been demolished was in fact still standing. It's a mixture of smooth stonework and quarry face bases, creates quite a striking effect, but I love the carved bluestone ram's head above the door. Another ornate doorway, but in a more modern style at the former Queen Victoria Hospital with grey granite steps, and they're probably from Harcourt and possibly sawn. Getting photos of these structures is not always as easy as it seems. It's not every day you get an invitation to visit Government House in Melbourne. So I was very lucky to be able to be one of a group representing Malmsbury District Landcare Group when they received a Landcare Award at Government House in 2019. It was a memorable opportunity to finally get some photos and experience Malmsbury's past and present contributions to the safe shaping of our state's landscape. These are the last two for Melbourne, the original English, Scottish and Australian Bank in Collins Street, now the ANZ Bank Museum, and what was originally Hibernian Pool is now Story Hall, part of RMIT. Both again simple smooth face Malmsbury Bluestone basic courses, but holding up state heritage listed buildings. Out in urban and regional Victoria, many of the sites reported were used in cemeteries, but there were buildings and monuments as well. I've already shown you the Stawell Courthouse steps, but there were many other locations. And I'm very thankful for those lovely newspaper articles that describe cemetery memorials in such detail that makes finding them very easy. And I suspect I'll find more as more regional newspapers are added to Trove. Recent ones I found through Beechworth, Williamstown and Wood End newspapers. This McCulloch family vault at the Maryborough Cemetery is another favourite of mine, mainly because I think it looks like a bluestone TARDIS.
Oh.
Don't try time travelling in your later years. Despite having its own local sources of bluestone, these two in Ballarat were also constructed with Malmsbury stone. And this would be a clear example of stone being transported by railway. As a measure of the durability of the stone, the octagonal base of the statue, which Malmsbury stone, shows no sign of degrading, but the light coloured pillar has noticeable degradation to it. It's a marble pillar. Perhaps that stone is not as suitable for an outdoor setting as Malmsbury Bluestones. The lozenge-shaped ornate doorways, pillars of the art gallery make a good contrast for the lighter coloured parts of the building, and another example of where I think George Knight was wrong. A rather different use of bluestone is this private fountain in Bendigo, the upper parts of which are granite. The base was reported to have been worked from one massive piece of bluestone quarried at Malmsbury, though I suspect it is actually 4 main pieces cut from one large block of stone, so I'm not too sure how you would lift that and actually put it on a train in Malmsbury and get it off again in Bendigo. But again, the paint really makes it hard to tell what's going on there. Malmsbury Bluestone paving was installed by the council here in Bendigo in the CBD, in and around Palmale, Hargraves and Williamson Street, but as far as I can tell, it is all now gone. And you can see here, the Malmsbury Company paving Hargraves Street in 1878 were paid £63. Lots more bluestone did actually come to Bendigo. If anyone wants to know where the rest of it is, I'm happy to let you know. The James B. Patterson Memorial in the Victory Park in Castlemaine is one of many examples where Malmsbury and Harcourt stones are used together. It was designed and built by W.T. Jones, stonemason of Malmsbury and Kyneton fame. The Castlemaine Botanic Garden gates are similar to those at the Whitehill Cemetery here in Bendigo, both sets of which are Malmsbury stone. I've seen some other bluestone gates on private residences, Bendigo and a church in Carisbrook that are also probably Malmsbury stone, but I've no proof for it. And the really difficulty there is getting access to private archives that document the purchase or use of that stone. For those of you who are regular patrons of the Goldfields Library Corporation, you may or may not have noticed the paving on the Elmore Branches entrance porch. The Athenaeum building was opened in February 1886 and featured a paved porch made of diamond-shaped pieces of Malmsbury bluestone surrounded by rectangular curving of the same material. It's one of only 21 places outside of Malmsbury where I know this paving was used, and only one of 7 where I know it has survived. And thank you to my colleague Angela for taking the photographs for me. Kyneton, the floor of the former Kyneton Hospital mortuary was paved in 1874 with Malmsbury bluestone. That suggests it was one of the earliest uses of the stone actually sawn at Malmsbury itself and not from Footscray. The former Bank of Victoria in Mollison Street, built a year later, was also reported to have a base course of Malmsbury stone. I was finally able to visit this one in Warrnambool in 2022, having seen it online several years earlier and then having to wait out COVID lockdowns to be able to get on the road and go and have a look. After making contact with a blog creator, I was then also given some archival evidence to support that. But the shadow effect created by the battlemented fence I quite find interesting, but I'm not sure it's the sort of fence that many people would want to sit on. The completion of the railway line to Echuca created some early regional markets for Malmsbury stone, in addition to the stone being used on the railway line itself. The caps on the columns of St Mary's Church are one example, as are several graves and monuments. This 1895 gravestone for George Cook I've included because it bears the name of the stonemason Edwin Tatterson of Malmsbury. And it shows that sometimes the stones were worked locally before being transported up the line, instead of the raw stone being freighted and then worked on by a local mason. Cemeteries have so many more stories to tell than just the names of dates of those buried beneath these stones. Many graves also bear the name of the monumental mason who made them, and because they also bear dates, they can be used to document the careers of these craftsmen, their materials and the mobility of their work. So I've seen gravestones in Port Fairy Cemetery, for example, that bear the names of masons from Melbourne. And there are probably vast numbers of graves in Victoria and interstate that feature gravestone bases and curves of Malmsbury Bluestone which remain unrecorded. And these are some that were reported, all in varying states of repair, with other granites and marbles. So we've got a red granite, probably an imported one, again Carrara marble and Harcourt granite in interaction with Malmsbury Bluestone. I did discover a few imposters and errors along the way in reporting. Sometimes the stone was reported as Malmsbury granite, and when I got there it was clearly bluestone. And there's no granite at Malmsbury, by the way. This school in Campbell's Creek is reported in a heritage study as having a Malmsbury Bluestone base course when it is in fact granite. The windows, sills and lintels do, however, appear to be Malmsbury Bluestone, but they're not mentioned in the study. A more interesting story emerges when you know that when large quantities of Malmsbury Bluestone were being carted down to Melbourne, some of it was also coming from Kyneton and Carlsruhe. And over the years, it is quite possible that some of the bluestone reported to be from Malmsbury was in fact coming from Carlsruhe and Kyneton. In the case of Prince's Bridge in Melbourne, this was widely reported at the time it was being built as containing Malmsbury Bluestone. But when you read the Kyneton newspapers, it becomes apparent from a court case that the stone actually came from South Kyneton. And what is happening here is the stone, through weathering, is delaminating or exfoliating and degrading. And if you look at the Malmsbury Viaduct, which is much older, you won't see stone behaving like this. Several years ago, samples were taken from Prince's Bridge, some from the Malmsbury Quarries and some from the quarry in South Kyneton where the stone came from. These were subjected to a wetting and drying cycle to see what would happen. The Kyneton stone and the bridge stone considerably expanded and contracted during that wetting cycle, which is what is driving the degradation. The Malmsbury stone barely changed, so that confirms that the bridge does not contain Malmsbury Bluestone. That same degradation is also occurring on the Supreme Court building in Melbourne, also supposedly built with a Malmsbury Bluestone base course. That means it too possibly is the Kyneton or Carlsruhe stone instead. It is often said that all good things must come to an end, and by the late 1920s, the best of the stone from the Malmsbury quarries was gone. Sometimes the stone was not even suitable for use as pitchers. And this is the last known local use of new Malmsbury stone, noting that the Catholic Church in Malmsbury was built in 1920s from a recycled grain store. The cemetery gates and lodge building were built with the bequest of the Stringer family. And the stone in the lodge has lots of imperfections and vesicles in it, suggesting it was not the same quality of stone that had been used in the past. And the simple coursed squared rubble wall construction with quarry faces is typical of local stone buildings in Victoria from the 1850s onwards. The entrance steps to the former Union Bank of Australia in Collins Street in Melbourne in 1939 was the last hurrah of what had been 8 decades of use of Malmsbury Bluestone, and I've yet to establish whether they are still there. But who's old enough to remember the original Melbourne City Square? One of the Malmsbury quarries was reopened in the late 70s, early 80s by Malacca Limited to permit the construction of this version of the Melbourne City Square with its sawn bluestone paving and water cascades. At the time I was a science student residing at La Trobe University in Bundoora and would wander past it between buses and trains when I went home on weekends, little realising that one day I would wish I had stopped and taken photos of it. So, where do we go to from here? I'll focus this talk on the heritage stone designation, the history of the stone and the things that were made with Malmsbury Bluestone. But we also need to think about the holes the stone industry leaves behind. The legacy of these quarries is far less pretty and less documented. If we are going to consider the future of the heritage stones, we also need to ask, where will any stone for repair works come from? The example of Princess Bridge poses a question of what do you do if quarries are empty or inaccessible. Abandoned quarry holes can sometimes be filled with garbage, capped, and then they get forgotten about until a redevelopment wants to use the land. There is currently no heritage planning protection for the more former Malmsbury quarries, and already several of them have recently been robbed of stone, waste stone for landscaping purposes. One or two are treasured by the current owners who voluntarily wish to preserve them. The construction of the Malmsbury bypass destroyed one quarry site, and while an archaeological study of another identified it as being of industrial heritage value, it's not yet on the Macedon Ranges Heritage Overlay. So little provision has been made for ensuring stone will be available for future repair works, other than to use second-hand stone. Are we willing to accept the demolition of one site to enable another to be restored? And who gets to choose what we keep and what we lose? Princess Bridge is one example where stone from another source will be used to repair it. But in doing so, it will offer a poor colour match. And the bridge is currently being restored and apparently stone is coming from Lara. Will any other Australian stones be accepted as global heritage stones? My advice, first find someone who's prepared to do the work involved. From my experience, the next key criteria to consider before going any further with the technical details is the period of use, excuse me, and the exploitation out of Australia. If these aren't met, it will be like pushing a rock uphill with a stick. So I hope you've learned something of your local history and heritage, the fascinating world of building stones, and enjoyed the visual tour of just some of the bits of Malmsbury that you can visit without even going to Malmsbury. I've included the IUG website, the stones up there, which you are welcome to go and have a look at and have a look at all the other stones. And I'm happy to take any questions anyone might have. So thank you.
What a wonderful presentation, Susan. It was really entertaining. I will never look at paving stones the same way again. I really enjoyed it. I probably have quite a lot of questions that I might get you to answer later, but any questions in the room? Do we need a mic or we just
We'll be all right.
Shout? Okay.
I've got a question.
Oh, John's
How did they get the bluestone onto the trains down at Malmsbury? Because it's quite hilly.
It's quite hilly. So
Yeah, was there a siding or something?
Yes, there was a siding. The initial transport out of the quarries was by horse and what they called stone drays.
Right.
And they'd take it up to the Malmsbury station, and then there was cranes at the siding there for lifting the stone on. Anyway, apart from the fact that the base of those is still there was one poor guy in the 1870s who was under a block of stone when one of them fell off the crane, and he was taken by train to Castlemaine Hospital and didn't make it.
Yeah.
But yes, those cranes at the station from there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So one of the architects for the Anglican Church in Malmsbury went across to New Zealand in the 1860s and was responsible for developing the building codes for one of the provinces there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Would he have known about, I can't remember, was that too early for him to have known about the bluestone qualities?
So what year did he head over there?
In probably the early 60s, probably 1864,
Yeah,
63.
he probably would have known by then. Yeah.
Okay.
Because his name wasn't Pritchard, by the way.
No, he was Swire.
Right, okay, right. I know Pritchard was one of the early architects in the area that went on and did bigger things, and also was involved with some of the later buildings that involved stone as well, but I haven't heard of that guy's name. But yeah, by then he would definitely have known about it.
We need to head for Dunedin.
Yeah. Okay, well that's one of the sites where it was used very early. As soon as the soaring took place, they were going to use it as paving in Dunedin. Yes.
Next holiday.
Yeah.
I was in Dunedin last October and it felt like Central Victoria. It was extraordinary. Yeah.
Ask a question that sort of ties into that, which is just about, I guess, the marketing. How do people get to know about this stone? Like, are there agents who are out there? Do you have any evidence of people sort of going out and marketing, taking catalogues or anything like that?
Definitely. So you had stone suppliers. So Wilson and Corbin, for example, were very early established, setting up Castlemaine Slate as an outlet. They were one of the intermediary owners of the stone sawing works at Footscray. I'm just trying to think of the name of the other ones. Wilson was involved, Colin Wilson. There's another one, William Train is another. So they might be agents. And then I've seen advertisements where you had people at Australian Wharves were the local agent. They were bringing stone down from Melbourne and selling it out of there. The exhibitions had a big impact as to people getting to understand the stone. So those ones were sent over to England, for example. Yes, there were definitely people that were promoting these stones. And then those same people were lobbying the government to reduce the freight tariffs on stone, so the stone could be moved and used in various purposes as well. Yes, there's politics behind the stone as well. Yeah.
So with the extensive use of bluestone pitches in Bendigo, in the gutters, would they be more likely to come from Axtyle or from Malmsbury?
Very early on, I think there were being some Malmsbury stone, but most of it would have been coming from the Axtyle quarries. Because again, that thing I showed from the city councils, Farley Ingham was getting lots of contracts, and then there was later on another organisation that was out there, can't get their name off the top of my head, that are also setting up quarries out there and bringing it in. So those people also lobbying the government to have the railway out there, so then they could bring it into the Bendigo railway. Yeah.
I'm just conscious of time because I don't know how Zoom quite works. We're just almost at 6:30. I think there's probably some more questions.
We can take more questions
In the room, we can take a few more questions.
Yeah, for
okay,
sure.
That's great. Yeah, so more questions or any online that have come in?
Not yet, no.
Any more questions in the room? While people are thinking, I might just give my quick plug for the November's session for Discovering History, which will be by Associate Professor Jennifer Jones, who's from La Trobe University. She's a great colleague of mine. She'll be presenting on the title of the paper, Providence and Misfortune in the Land of Gold, the loss and suffering of the Brown family on the Bendigo goldfields. So people might know about the Brown family letters. These are amazing collection of letters that exist about early life on the goldfields. So Jennifer will be presenting her work on that. And this is connected to some of the Sandhurst library collections that we have at the Trobe Bendigo campus as well. So do come along to that if you can. If there's any more questions, we do have a couple more minutes if people have thought of anything else. Otherwise, you're very welcome to come and talk to Susan, who and her pet rocks as well. Have been making their way around the room.
They're not here, I'm keeping an eye on them.
Keeping them warm, yeah, someone's babysitting the rocks, this is great. But yeah, if there's no more questions, I'd just like to thank Susan again for a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, Susan.
And if anyone wants to learn anything more, I'm upstairs at the library 3 days a week. You can talk to me there as well. So, thank you.